Now, for those of you that don't know who Jack Hunter is, you really need to get out. Jack Hunter is also known as the Southern Avenger, and if you ever go on YouTube and just write Southern Avenger on YouTube, you'll actually be able to watch a lot of his videos. He also does a radio show, and he also is the official blogger for the Ron Paul campaign. But Jack Hunter is, without a doubt, one of the guys I look to. I host my own local radio show over on Tan Talk 1340 in Clearwater, website 1787network.com. But Jack does such a good job on his show and is able to engage callers in such a great way and explains things, in my opinion, in a way that is very clinical and is done so much without emotion and is more based off of only the facts, where I think I probably use a little bit too emotion sometimes. However, it's the way it is. Everybody has their own way of going about things. But Jack Hunter is an amazing person. I respect him very deeply, and I give you now Jack Hunter.
How's everybody doing today? Y'all having a good time? Yeah. All right, we got to start with the obvious. Anything nullification. You people are crazy. You realize that, right? Everybody in this room is an absolute nut job, an absolute crank, an extremist, if you will. You all realize this, right? That's what we're called all the time, right? Well, I would like to examine for a second what sanity is. I just reviewed a book for the American Conservative, which is a magazine I work for. It's the new book by Pat Buchanan called Suicide is a Superpower. I'm a big fan of Pat Buchanan. I have been for a long time. His thesis is that we've reached the brink, that things are too big, that the liberal things in our society have sort of eaten away at the cultural core of this country, that things like Keynesian economics have sort of sold us short. His general thesis is that we've gone too far. Things are too big, the center cannot hold, and it's all over. Pretty grim stuff, right? Well, I think he does have a point. We have reached the brink. We've reached a certain line. The problem is the people in charge in this country and in Washington, D.C. define that as sanity. What is crazy about us? Well, we don't like the idea of them telling us where or how or when we can purchase health care. That's something we should be able to do ourselves. Oh, well, that's extreme. That's crazy. We don't like the idea that we keep the fruit of our own labor. Excuse me, we do like the idea that we keep the fruit of our own labor. Who doesn't like that? The people up there in Washington, D.C. Yet they call us crazy. Oh, I don't know. We have a problem with a $15 trillion national debt that keeps climbing. Our GDP is equal to the complete debt, which is crazy. That's unprecedented in American history. And yet, we want to do something about that, and they say that we're crazy. Well, now, that's not the way it is. The people in this room, the people who think like we do, the people who want to get back to the Constitution, are the same people in this country. And the media and the politicians and the political establishment can sing that tune till the cows come home, but it's not true. If we're going to restore sanity to this country, we have to restore the United States Constitution. And that's when you get into concepts like nullification, which is why we're here today. Now, I'd like to point out that in this long trek of heading towards the brink, that it is so-called conservatives that have got us to this point as much as the liberals. We always hear, if you're listening to talk radio, this sort of, it's Republicans are good and Democrats are bad. The conservatives have got it right and the liberals have got it wrong, but absolutely not. You know, the last president we had under the Republican banner was sort of the predecessor, set the stage for the current Democratic president we have right now. Think about this for a second. Imagine there was never a George W. Bush. Never happened. Well, yeah, that's what we imagine. And imagine that when Bill Clinton left office, Barack Obama took office. The exact same agenda we got from Bush. The Afghanistan-Iraq wars, Medicare Plan D, No Child Left Behind, doubling the size of government, doubling the national debt. All that happened under President Obama. It would have been the biggest big government president we had to date at that time. Do you think, well, I don't know, the cable news outlets that are conservative, and the talk radio hosts that are conservative, and the columnists that are conservative, would have given Barack Obama a free pass? I'm asking you, do you think that's what would have happened? No. Absolutely not. So where were they when a Republican was doing all this stuff? And you'll hear them when we criticized him. No, you did not. And certainly not to the extent that you criticize this guy. I can turn on talk radio, I'm in talk radio, and hear a plethora of hosts rail against Obama for 3 hours, and I'm right there with him, but guess what? If we don't do it to our own, we're not any better. We have to get back to a comprehensive conservatism, in my opinion, and that starts with constitutionalism. Now, I bring that up because, you know, a lot of people are saying, some of those old establishment types, that there's too much of a libertarian influence in the conservative movement right now in the Republican Party. I'm not a libertarian. A lot of people think because of the alliances I made with the people I work for that I'm just some wacky, crazy libertarian. I'm a traditional conservative. I was a big Buchanan supporter for president. I was a fan of my governor, Mark Sanford, down in South Carolina before he got into trouble, but I was for standing up against stimulus. But I'm just an old-fashioned traditional conservative. But what the conservative movement needs, what this country needs, is a libertarian injection. And what I mean by that is, we got into trouble, conservatism, the right, Republicans, whatever you want to call it, because there wasn't enough libertarianism there. You know, Reagan's old three-legged stool of conservatism was you had the social conservatives, you had the national security conservatives, and you had your economic/libertarian conservatives. If any three weren't present, a genuinely conservative agenda could not be pushed forward. Well, where were the economic/individual liberty/libertarian conservatives for the last 8 years before Barack Obama? They were non-existent. The idea that we hear from some of the old guard that it is the libertarians that are the problem, no, it's the libertarians that might save that god-awful party from doing what it did in the past and take us in more I call myself a Republican to the extent that there's Republicans worth cheering for. There's like 2 or 3 of them now, I'm sure. But I would like to share with you, I'm a big fan of sort of the conservative intellectuals who helped shape the movement in the early days, guys like Russell Kirk and Richard Weaver. I want to share with you, when we're talking about constitutionalism and the commonality between just your plain old conservatives and libertarians, how it's all one big mix. It's important to note this. This is from an author called Richard Weaver. Some of you in this room might be familiar with him. Ideas Have Consequences. It's his famous conservative book. This is his take on conservatives and libertarians in 1960. And this is appropriate for a room where we're talking about the Constitution and nullification. This is what Weaver had to say in 1960. It took the study of John Calhoun to wake me up to the realization that a Constitution is and should be primarily a negative document. A Constitution, and we may think primarily of the Constitution of the United States in this connection, is more to be revered for what it prohibits than what it authorizes. A Constitution is a series of thou shalt nots to the government, specifying the ways in which the liberties of individuals and of groups are not to be invaded. With me. A Constitution is protection against that kind of arbitrary interference to which government left to itself is prone. Amen to that. It is right, therefore, to refer to our Constitution as a charter of liberties through its negative provisions. And it is no accident that in our day, the Friends of Liberty have been pleaders for constitutional government. He's talking about the libertarians around 1960. I think conservatives and libertarians stand together in being this kind of constitutionalists. Both want a settled code of freedom for the individual. Richard Weaver, writing in 1960, saying something that so many on the right today just can't see. You can't be a strict, limited government person if you're in favor of all sorts of government that just happen to fall under a Republican brand. And you have to be liberty-minded. And that is part of the American conservative tradition. Richard Weaver talked about protecting individual rights. Well, as I said earlier, we should have the right to pick our own health care, for example. Now, where we get into trouble is where we have a pick-and-choose constitution. Let me give you a recent example. Do you remember when Barack Obama decided that we needed to go to war in Libya? And people like Senator Rand Paul, and the gentleman I'm working for is running for president, Ron Paul, and my own senator in South Carolina, Jim DeMint, who I'm a big fan of, all stood up and said, you can't do that without congressional authority. You cannot do that without congressional authority. And Barack Obama, like pretty much everything else has done, just did it anyway. What does he need a constitution for? That doesn't do anything to him. Now, some people on the right, and I won't get into the names, that's not what's important, the message is what's important, said, we don't agree with going to Libya, but the president has the power to do that.